Alright, here it goes. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I've been following this sub for a while, and honestly, I think I need to get this off my chest. My name's Tom, and my wife, Lisa, and I have been married for 7 years. We've had our ups and downs, like any couple, but things seemed stable. Or at least, that's what I thought. We met in college. I was a quiet guy, engineering major, and she was this fiery, confident art student who somehow chose me over every guy in the room. We had this whirlwind romance that everyone thought would fizzle out, but here we were, years later, married, a house, and talking about starting a family soon. But lately, things started feeling off. Lisa had always been a bit of a free spirit, but recently, she'd been out late more often, brushing off my questions with quick excuses. Oh, the girls wanted to grab drinks. Or, the gallery needed me to stay late. At first, I thought I was overthinking. She's always been outgoing, loved her friends and her work. But then, there were small things, nights when she wouldn't come home until well after midnight, brushing it off with a lost track of time. Or days when she'd be glued to her phone, smiling at some text and quickly tucking it away when I got close. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was just paranoid. I even talked myself out of bringing it up a few times. But there was a feeling, this gut instinct that kept gnawing at me. And as much as I didn't want to believe it, part of me knew something was definitely wrong. Alright, so here's where things started getting real. One night, Lisa came home at almost 2 a.m. I'd stayed up waiting for her, hoping we could talk or just have one of those late-night chats we used to love. She came in reeking of perfume, not hers, and claimed she'd been out with her friend, Rachel. But the story felt off, like she'd rehearsed it too many times. After she went to bed, I decided to check her phone. I know, I shouldn't have snooped, but something in me had to know. Her phone was locked, but I'd seen her passcode enough times. When I opened it, my hands were already shaking, and within minutes, my worst suspicions were confirmed. There were texts from a guy named Jake. The messages didn't leave much room for imagination. They talked about meeting up, how much they missed each other, and there was one message that hit me like a freight train. Last night was amazing. I wish we could be together all the time. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling numb. I'd read enough to know exactly what was going on. The woman I'd built a life with was sneaking around with some other guy, and here I was, reading about it like some horrible soap opera. It felt surreal. Part of me wanted to believe I was overreacting, that maybe I was misunderstanding something, but deep down, I knew. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. Lisa walked into the kitchen, still groggy, and I could barely look at her without feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. But I knew I had to confront her, no matter how much it hurt. I took a deep breath and said, "Lisa, who's Jake?" The look on her face was priceless. She froze, blinking a few times like she couldn't believe I'd just asked that. Then, she tried to play it off with a laugh. "Jake? Oh, he's just a guy from work. Why are you asking?" Her nonchalance made my blood boil. I'd expected her to deny it, maybe even try to gaslight me, but the way she brushed it off was infuriating. I told her I'd seen the texts, every word, and there was no point in lying. Suddenly, her face changed. She looked cornered, and her tone went from casual to defensive. "Okay, fine. Yes, Jake and I have been talking. But it's not what you think. It's harmless. He's just someone I can talk to about things I can't talk to you about. It's not like we're just friends." Friends. Right. Friends who apparently have amazing nights together. I called her out on that specific message, and she immediately got angry, accusing me of invading her privacy and trying to twist her words. She said I was being paranoid, that I'd completely misread the situation, and that she was just trying to be nice to someone who was going through a hard time. In that moment, all I could see was the person I thought I knew becoming a stranger right before my eyes. I told her I wasn't buying her excuses, that she owed me the truth, but she doubled down, saying I was overreacting and that I was being controlling by snooping through her phone. It was like talking to a wall, After that confrontation, Lisa stormed out of the house. She grabbed her purse, muttered something about needing space, and slammed the door. I just sat there, staring at the empty spot where she'd been standing, feeling this heavy weight settle over me. I was stunned, furious, but mostly, I felt a kind of emptiness I'd never experienced before. The entire day, I felt like I was in a fog. One minute, I'd be pacing the house, replaying every word she'd said, trying to make sense of it. The next, I'd sit down, exhausted, staring blankly at the wall. How had it come to this? We were supposed to be planning our future, not tearing it apart over some guy named Jake. As the hours passed, the anger started to creep in. I couldn't believe she'd turned this around on me, calling me controlling, when all I'd done was uncover what was already there. The betrayal felt so personal. I'd always prided myself on being a good partner, someone she could rely on. I thought we shared everything. And here I was, realizing that maybe I'd been living in a lie. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those texts, her cold expression, the way she brushed it all off like our marriage didn't mean anything. I kept wondering if I'd missed something along the way, if there had been signs I'd ignored or moments I could have done something differently. I started questioning everything, even myself. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The realization hit me like a brick. The woman I loved, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was hiding a whole other life from me. And there was no going back from that. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, each one hitting me harder than the last. Lisa didn't come home that night, and when she finally did, it felt like an eternity had passed. I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to play the role of the caring wife, but the mask was slipping. That evening, I knew I had to make a decision. We sat down in the living room, the air thick with tension, and I finally said, "I can't keep doing this. We can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's clearly not." Lisa seemed taken aback, her defenses rising again. "Tom, please. We can work this out. I'll stop talking to Jake. It was just a phase. I promise it wasn't serious." But I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her that her words meant nothing without trust, and right now, I felt completely betrayed. The thought of working it out felt impossible. "You're asking me to just forget everything, but I can't. I need time to think about what I really want." She tried to play the victim, saying I was making this more complicated than it needed to be, but I stood my ground. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I needed to protect myself. After a long, emotional discussion, I told her I needed space, time to sort through my feelings without her influence. I packed a few essentials and decided to stay at my brother's place. It felt surreal, but deep down, I knew it was the right choice. I had to put my mental health first, even if it meant stepping away from the life we built together. As I drove away from our home, I felt a mix of freedom and fear. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let this define me. I would emerge from this stronger, whether or not it meant getting back together with Lisa. Staying at my brother's place was both a relief and a struggle. The first few nights, I felt like I was in a bubble, just floating through my emotions without any real sense of direction. My brother, Mark, tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He'd always been the protective type, and now, he was constantly checking in on me, making sure I wasn't spiraling too far down. I spent hours laying on his couch, scrolling through my phone, reading those awful texts again and again, trying to convince myself it was all just a bad dream. I had so many questions swirling in my mind. How long had this been going on? Was there something I could have done to prevent it? I felt like I'd been blindsided by a tornado, and now all I had left was debris and shattered trust. Each time I thought about Lisa, I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I missed the moments we'd shared, our late-night talks, the spontaneous weekend trips, and even the quiet mornings over coffee. It hurt to think about how easily those memories had been tarnished by her betrayal. But as I reflected, I also realized I had given her a lot of power over my happiness, and that was something I needed to change. After a few days, I started journaling. Writing it all down helped me untangle my feelings. I poured out my anger, sadness, and confusion, trying to make sense of it all. I wrote letters to Lisa that I never intended to send, just to release the words stuck in my throat. I focused on healing, seeking clarity, and reminding myself that I deserved someone who valued me. Gradually, I began to feel a flicker of strength. I started to understand that this wasn't just about her infidelity, but also about me reclaiming my life. I realized that even if it hurt, I had the power to decide my path moving forward. It was a painful lesson, but I knew I had to learn it. As the weeks passed, I began to find a sense of normalcy in the chaos. I started focusing on myself, rediscovering hobbies I'd set aside during my marriage. I dusted off my guitar and began playing again, pouring my emotions into music. It felt cathartic, like I was channeling all the pain and betrayal into something beautiful. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while. They rallied around me, taking me out for drinks and just letting me vent. Each laugh, each shared story, reminded me that life was still full of joy, even amidst the heartache. They helped me realize I was more than just a husband. I was Tom, a person with my own identity and dreams. But the hardest part was deciding what to do about Lisa. We hadn't spoken much since I left, and part of me felt guilty for not reaching out. But deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to dive back into that emotional mess. I needed to see what life looked like without her presence overshadowing my choices. After a month, I finally reached out to her. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop, a neutral ground where we could talk without the pressure of home. My heart raced as I walked in, bracing myself for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Lisa was already there, looking different yet somehow the same. She seemed more vulnerable than I remembered, her eyes carrying a weight of regret. As we sat down, the small talk felt forced. Eventually, I laid it all out. I couldn't just forget what had happened. I told her I had spent time reflecting on myself, and I was learning to love myself again, but I couldn't jump back into our relationship without addressing the betrayal. To my surprise, she admitted she had messed up. Lisa said she realized how much she had taken me for granted, how she had let her insecurities lead her to seek validation from someone else. But even as she spoke, I could hear the familiar excuses creeping back in, the blame shifting away from her. It became clear to me then that while she was trying to take responsibility, she wasn't fully ready to accept the consequences of her actions. I knew I had to stand firm in my decision to prioritize my own healing, no matter how painful it was. I told her I needed time to figure out what I wanted, whether that meant working towards a future together or moving on completely. It was tough, but in that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was taking control of my life, and it felt liberating. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life on my terms. I took a break from dating and instead poured my energy into self-improvement. I enrolled in a weekend workshop for music, began volunteering at a local charity, and even started working on some fitness goals. It felt good to put myself first and explore my passions without the weight of a failing marriage dragging me down. Eventually, I did meet up with Lisa again, but it was more casual. We had both been processing our feelings, and while the emotional connection was still there, the tension had shifted. We talked openly about the state of our relationship, and for the first time, I could sense genuine remorse in her voice. She wanted to work on herself too, and I appreciated her honesty. But I also knew that reconciliation wouldn't be easy. Trust was shattered, and rebuilding it would take time, patience, and a lot of effort from both sides. I was willing to consider the possibility of us getting back together in the future, but only if we both committed to real change. I made it clear that I wouldn't settle for anything less than a relationship built on trust, respect, and honesty. As I reflect on this journey, I realize how much I've grown. This experience taught me about my own worth and the importance of open communication in a relationship. I learned that vulnerability can lead to both pain and growth, and sometimes you have to let go of what you thought was forever to find your true self. To anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, my advice is simple: trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Take time for yourself, even if it's painful. Surround yourself with supportive people who uplift you, and never settle for a love that doesn't value your worth. Healing takes time, but you'll come out stronger, ready to embrace new beginnings, whether that's with someone new or with the person who truly deserves you. Thank you for reading my story. Here's to new chapters and better choices ahead.